"Who are you?" said the caterpillar. "I hardly know, sir, just at present," Alice replied rather shyly. "At least I know who I was when I got up this morning, but I think I must have changed several times since then." Words from Alice's Adventures in Wonderland by Lewis Carroll. It's not just Wonderland. It seems change and transition are a natural and inevitable part of life. Does anyone want to argue that point? Okay. Let me ask you a question. How many of you have had a change or transition in your life in the last 5 years? Yeah, right? Okay, so now, how many of you expect to have the same amount of change in the next 5 years? Yeah, see, usually we don't expect it. We'll see. Although we often use the words change and transition interchangeably, this morning I'd like to make a decision. Change will mean objective changes in the world around us, things that other people can perceive. Transition refers to that shift that takes place inside us. For example, a move to a new house is a change. The transition refers to that shift that takes place inside of us as we internally begin to think of this new house as our home. To get us thinking about change, I'd like to invite you to try something with me. Imagine that you're preparing to introduce yourself. Think about what you will say, but there's a catch. You are to introduce yourself including only those things that are unchanging and not in transition. Introduction. Sometimes, like in a workshop, I don't do it in worship because some people don't like to talk to other people in worship, but sometimes I ask people to turn and talk to each other and try introducing themselves. And you know, the first introduction, the things that are stable and unchanging, is nice. It's nice. But then you ask people to talk about the change and transition, and oh my gosh, the level in the room just goes up so much, right? Because as necessary and comforting as our stable nature can be, life's dynamic as they went through their own transitions. Over time, I actually developed a 4-session course based on Bridges' book because I believe it's helpful for everyone to understand the basics of transition. All transitions, all of them, have the same basic patterns. And whether we label that change good or bad, or whether it was expected or unexpected, chosen or forced, those patterns exist in all transitions. And what I have found is that when people understand these patterns, they tend to be less. But as a culture, we aren't strong in identifying that neutral zone, that in-between wandering in the desert time. We like people to know what's next. We like them to be clear when things are over. So imagine the talk at a family event. "So you're graduating next month. What's up? What's next?" And our graduate may have plans, but may mutter something polite, but internally they may be screaming, "I have no earthly idea. I just want to get through finals." As a society, we like people to have a plan. We're not really just go on walkabout kind of people. But sometimes wandering is exactly what is needed. To explore these ideas, I'd like to use an example, seemingly straightforward change, retirement. Some of us have been through this. Some of us have watched a simple change, right? Easy. Of course, even on the observable level of change, it's not often that simple. Was the retirement gradual or a clean break? Was it planned, prepared for, sudden, or forced? Was it hoped for or feared? Were there great expectations leading up to this moment? Retirement represents a change, working, not working. But what about the internal work of retirement, the work of transition? No problem. What's the transition? No longer in the rat race. You're free, stress-free, no more 9 to 5, no more overtime. But what of your patterns, your ways of being? I mean, what do you do when you get up in the morning? Who do you talk to about your weekend on Monday? Do weekends even matter anymore? And what about your identity? Wonder a bit. We may feel a little lost. We may, for example, overfunction at home, disrupting the lives of our loved ones in not so helpful ways. Just saying. It's okay to take our time, to not know, to wander, to try new things, to not like them, and to stop doing them. It's okay not to know just yet. The trick is to keep wandering until we're ready to come out the other side, into a happy and healthy retirement or the new beginning that's appropriate to whatever transition you might be going through. All transitions have three parts: an ending, a neutral zone in between, wandering in the desert, and a new beginning. Here's the trick. They aren't always in order. They are often messy, and sometimes they're hard to identify. Change and transition are natural processes that go on throughout our lives at many levels, but I want to expand. Institutions and even society undergo change and transition. Institutional change and transition, like personal change and transition, can be tricky. Even trickier, really, because it involves more people, each of whom is processing at their own. The day came when the risk to remain tight in a bud was more painful than the risk it took to bloom. The day came when the risk to remain tight in a bud was more painful than the risk it took to bloom. Sometimes holding on to what was will no longer cut it. Sometimes embracing the new is the only life-giving way to go. So after experiencing interim ministry in Texas and Miami, I decided it was time to settle again. The word settle didn't feel all that settled at all. On my 5th day on the job, the board mentioned a desire to renovate or build. They did not mention this in the search process. Took us several years to really get going on that. By the way, I love the new wing. It's beautiful. I remember a time when it was so dark in the corridor downstairs that we couldn't have bulletin boards because there wasn't enough light to read them. And somebody said, why don't we put up new lights? It was a radical idea. Okay. It took us several years in Orlando to really get going on our renovation, and even as I left, they were still renovating the 3rd of 3 buildings on campus, and I was there for almost 9 years. So change and transition. Now, I'm going to step aside and do my little stewardship bit for you. One change in me always reminds me of this congregation. When I was a relatively new member here, I was asked to be a visiting steward. You still do, where come to your house and talk to you, or maybe a coffee date or something, and they would talk to you about your pledge for the coming year. So I was asked to be one, and I said yes, because I was new and I liked to be helpful. But then I started losing sleep. I had been raised not to talk about money. I remember writing a handwritten note at midnight in the days before email, reneging on that commitment. Whew. The thing was, though I felt better, I was sure that somebody, maybe everybody, was mad and would be disappointed in me. But apparently they weren't really overly obsessed about it, because a year later they asked me again. And I said yes again. And I wrote another note at midnight. But over the last 30 years, I have let go of the taboo of talking about money. I recognize that money is one of the many resources that we have to empower our faith. It is a means of transforming lives and building the world we wish to live in. Ministers have come and gone. Beloved members have come and gone. There have been multiple buildings on this site. The community around you has changed a bit. Your website says you are a covenantal community gathered for worship, mutual care, faith formation, and service to the common good. You have grown over the years in your understanding of what that all means in this particular place where you exist. Surely there'll be more to come. You aren't now who you were 300 years ago, or 30 years ago, or even 3 years ago. You are not today who you will be 3 years from now. When I first spoke from this pulpit as a layperson, there was no sound system in this sanctuary. There was no elevator making this beautiful building accessible. These things are hard to imagine now, but those additions were a little radical at the time. Do you think the founders who started this journey centuries ago could have imagined all the twists and turns this group has been through? But they adapted and persevered, transitioned and transformed, and you can too. Change and transition is always part of our individual lives and our communal lives. You've tried some things in the past. You'll try some things in the future. I'm sure there are things that still need tweaking. You'll likely wander together every now and then. Maybe there will be times when some of you are wandering, and some of you are still working on that ending thing, and some of you have already moved on to something new. You will often find that you're in different places, and maybe for a while. And the future undoubtedly holds more changes, more chances to appreciate the internal process of transition that accompanies them. Reverend Ellen is on her sabbatical, a time when she intentionally changes things up so that she can experience internal transitions and grow, so that she will return to you refreshed and renewed. You too, individually and collectively, have the opportunity to consider your future, your becoming. There are practical questions at times like this, of course, like who is doing what while she's away? There are also less practical, more philosophical questions. It's a never-ending evolution as you ask yourself, how will you serve the cause of liberal religion here and now, in Chelmsford and beyond, in 2024? I mean, who do you want to be when you grow up? These are not simple questions with simple answers. They're juicy topics for deep conversation. Handled with care and compassion, these are the things that make relationships strong and community real. And they prepare us for an even greater challenge, changing the world. Because let's face it, there are a few things that need changing. We've been passing a number of notable 50-year anniversaries over the past few years, drawing our attention to the way things were. Let me draw your attention to one that sticks out in the minds of many of us who were children at the time. 55 years ago, humankind walked on the moon. 55 years ago. Think about it. So much has changed, and so much hasn't. If you took the opportunity to watch any of the coverage of the events from 1969, you may or may not have noticed that there was exactly one woman in the firing room at the time of launch. You may have noticed the lack of racial diversity amid the sea of men. I watched that first step from a school auditorium floor where all the girls from my scout camp had been bused so that we would not miss this amazing event. It was and is so exciting to me. And how fascinating to see how the world has changed. Surely a pan of that control room now would look differently. And yet, racism and sexism are still too much a part of the fabric of American life. And there were protesters outside the gates of the Space Center. They were questioning the expenditures on this project when too many children, particularly children of color, went to bed hungry. 55 years later, too many children still go to bed hungry. Now, personally, I would not give up the space program. I think that what humanity gets out of it is worth the cost. Questions of billionaires aside for the moment. And yet, I cannot help but ask what transitions we must make, each of us personally, but also all of us collectively, in order to be the change we want to see in the world. I don't think we need to choose between a space program and a better world with well-fed children. I do think that we need to actively choose to make a difference if we want one. What are we willing to let go of? What are we willing to embrace to be part of creating a peaceful, just, and sustainable world for all? I fear we are still wandering, not yet ready to step into the world of our dreams. And yet I remain hopeful. I am hopeful as more and more people engage the conversations and the learning that will help us find our way through this wilderness. There's so much that's possible If we keep our hearts and our minds open, if we read the book, visit the place, have the conversation, learn the thing that will help us recognize the new way that is waiting for us. Always and forever, there is more. And I personally think it's very exciting. So here is my charge to you. In your personal life, in your communal life, and in your civic life, be kind. Reach out your hand to those still holding on to the past. Listen with wonder to those who can see glimpses of the future. And make room for your own soul to wander, to wonder, and to grow. Amen, and blessed be.